What is Art? By Leo Tolstoy. Chapter 16. What settles whether art is good or bad in its content? Art, together with speech, is one of the instruments of communion, and therefore one of the instruments of progress, that is, of humanity's movement forward towards perfection. Speech makes it possible for the generations now alive to know everything that earlier generations learned by experience and reflection, and everything the best and most advanced people of our own day have learned. Art makes it possible for the generations now alive to feel everything that people before them felt, and everything the best and most advanced people feel now. And just as knowledge evolves, so that truer and more necessary knowledge drives out and replaces knowledge that is mistaken and needless, so exactly do feelings evolve through art. Lower feelings, less kind and less needful for the good of people, are driven out by feelings that are kinder and more needful for that good. That is the purpose of art. And so, in its content, art is the better, the more fully it serves that purpose, and the worse, the less it serves it. And the appraisal of feelings, the recognition of this or that feeling is more or less good, that is, as needful for the good of people, is made by the religious consciousness of a given age. In every given historical age, and in every human society, there is a highest understanding of the meaning of life, the highest that the people of that society have reached, and it settles the highest good that society strives for. That understanding is the religious consciousness of the given time and the given society. It is always clearly expressed by some of the advanced people in the society and more or less vividly felt by everyone. Such a religious consciousness, with an expression to match, always exists in every society. If it seems to us that our society has no religious consciousness, that is not because there really is none. It is because we do not want to see it. And we often do not want to see it because it exposes our life as being out of step with it. Religious consciousness in a society is like the direction of a flowing river. If the river flows, then there is a direction in which it flows. If a society lives, then there is a religious consciousness, and it points out the direction in which all the people of that society, more or less consciously, are striving. So, there always has been and there is a religious consciousness in every society, and the feelings carried by art have always been appraised in accordance with it. Only on the basis of the religious consciousness of their own age have people ever picked out, from the endlessly varied field of art, the art that carries the feelings which make the religious consciousness of that age real in life. Such art has always been highly valued and encouraged, and art that carried feelings flowing from the religious consciousness of an earlier age, art left behind, already outlived, has always been condemned and despised. All the rest of art, carrying the whole variety of feelings by which people commune with one another, was neither condemned nor forbidden, so long as it did not carry feelings contrary to the religious consciousness. Among the Greeks, for example, the art that was picked out, approved and encouraged was the art that carried feelings of beauty, strength, and courage. Hesiod, Homer, Phidias. The art that was condemned and despised was the art that carried feelings of coarse sensuality, of despondency, of softness. Among the Jews, the art that was picked out and encouraged was the art that carried feelings of devotion and submission to the God of the Jews and to his commandments, parts of the book of Genesis, the prophets, the Psalms. The art that was condemned and despised was the art that carried feelings of idol worship, the golden calf. And all the rest of the art, the stories, the songs, the dances, the ornament on houses, on vessels, on clothes, art that was not contrary to the religious consciousness, was not noticed and not discussed at all. That is how art has been appraised by its content, always and everywhere, and that is how it should be appraised, because such an attitude to art flows from the properties of human nature, and those properties do not change. I know that in the current opinion of our time, religion is a superstition that humanity has outgrown, and that our age is therefore supposed to have no religious consciousness common to all people by which art could be appraised. I know this is the current opinion in the supposedly educated circles of our day. People who do not accept Christianity in its true meaning, and who therefore invent for themselves all kinds of philosophical and aesthetic theories to hide from themselves the senselessness and the wrongness of their lives, cannot think otherwise. These people confuse the idea of a religious cult with the idea of religious consciousness, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not, and they think that in denying the cult, they are denying the religious consciousness. But all these attacks on religion, all these attempts to set up a view of the world contrary to the religious consciousness of our time, are the plainest proof of all that this religious consciousness is there, and that it exposes the lives of people who live out of step with it. If progress goes on in humanity, if there is a movement forward, then there must be something to point out the direction of that movement. And religions have always been that pointer. All history shows that the progress of humanity has come about in no other way than under the guidance of religion. And if the progress of humanity cannot come about without the guidance of religion, and progress is always going on, and so is going on in our time too, then there must be a religion of our time. So whether the so-called educated people of our day like it or not, they must admit that religion exists. Not the religion of a cult, Catholic, Protestant, or any other, but religious consciousness, the necessary guide of progress in our time as in every other. And if there's a religious consciousness among us, then our art must be appraised on the basis of that religious consciousness. And exactly as always and everywhere, the art that carries feelings flowing from the religious consciousness of our time must be picked out from all the art that is indifferent. It must be recognized, valued highly, and encouraged. The art that is contrary to that consciousness must be condemned and despised, and all the rest, the indifferent art, must be neither picked out nor encouraged. The religious consciousness of our time in its broadest practical application is this: the awareness that our good, material and spiritual, private and common, temporal and eternal, lies in the brotherly life of all people, in our loving union with one another. This awareness has been expressed not only by Christ and by all the best people of the past. It is not only repeated in the most various forms and from the most various sides by the best people of our own time. It already serves as the guiding thread through the whole complicated work of humanity, a work that consists, on one side, in the destruction of the physical and moral barriers that keep people apart, and on the other, in the setting up of those principles common to all people, which can and must join them into one universal brotherhood. It is on the basis of this awareness that we must appraise every phenomenon of our life, our art among them. We must pick out from the whole field of art the art that carries feelings flowing from this religious consciousness, and we must value it highly and encourage it. We must reject the art that is contrary to this consciousness, and we must not give the rest of art an importance that does not belong to it. The chief mistake made by the people of the upper classes in the time of the so-called Renaissance, and we go on making it now, was not that they stopped valuing religious art and attaching importance to it. The people of that time could not attach importance to it, because like the people of the upper classes in our own day, they could not believe in what the majority took for religion. Their mistake was that in the place of the religious art they no longer had, they set up a worthless art, whose only aim was to give people pleasure. They began to pick out, to value, and to encourage, as religious art, what in no way deserves such value and such encouragement. One of the fathers of the church said that the chief misfortune of people is not that they do not know God, but that they have set up in the place of God what is not God. It is the same with art. The chief trouble with the people of the upper classes in our time is not yet that they have no religious art. It is that in the place of the highest religious art, picked out from all the rest as especially important and precious, they have picked out the most worthless art, mostly harmful art, whose aim is the pleasure of a few. By its exclusiveness alone, it already stands against that Christian principle of universal union, which makes up the religious consciousness of our time. In the place of religious art, an empty and often depraved art has been set up, and this hides from people the need for that true religious art, which ought to be there in life in order to make life better. It is true that the art which satisfies the demands of the religious consciousness of our time is nothing like the art of the past. But in spite of that unlikeness, what makes up the religious art of our time is very clear and very definite to anyone who does not deliberately hide the truth from himself. In earlier times, the highest religious consciousness united only one society of people, large as that society might be, but still only one among others. The Jews, the citizens of Athens, the citizens of Rome. The feelings carried by the art of those times flowed from the desire for the power, the greatness, the glory, and the prosperity of those societies. And the heroes of that art could be people who served that prosperity by force, by cunning, by trickery, by cruelty. Odysseus, Jacob, David, Samson, Hercules, and all the champions. But the religious consciousness of our time picks out no single society of people. On the contrary, it demands the union of all, of absolutely all people without exception, and above every other virtue it sets brotherly love for all people. And so the feelings carried by the art of our time not only cannot coincide with the feelings carried by the art of the past. Christian art, truly Christian art, was long in establishing itself, and has not established itself to this day. And the reason is precisely this. Christian religious consciousness was not one of those small steps by which humanity moves evenly forward. It was an enormous upheaval, one that must inevitably change the whole understanding people have of life, and the whole inner ordering of their life, if it has not changed them already. It is true that the life of humanity, like the life of a single person, moves evenly. But in that even movement there are, as it were, turning points, which sharply divide the life that came before from the life that comes after. Christianity was such a turning point for humanity. At least it must appear so to us, who live by the Christian consciousness. Christian consciousness gave a new direction to all human feelings, and so it changed both the content and the meaning of art completely. The Greeks could make use of the art of the Persians, and the Romans of the art of the Greeks, just as the Jews could make use of the art of the Egyptians. The basic ideals were one and the same. The ideal was the greatness and the good of the Persians, or the greatness and the good of the Greeks, or of the Romans. The same art was carried over into other conditions and served new peoples. But the Christian ideal changed everything, turned everything over, so that, as the Gospel says, what was great before people became an abomination before God. The ideal was no longer the greatness of a pharaoh or a Roman emperor, nor the beauty of a Greek, nor the riches of Phoenicia. It was humility, chastity, compassion, love. The hero was no longer the rich man, but Lazarus the beggar. Not Mary of Egypt in the time of her beauty, but Mary of Egypt in the time of her repentance. Not those who gathered wealth, but those who gave it away. Not those who lived in palaces, but those who lived in catacombs and huts. Not those who ruled over others, but those who acknowledged no power but God's. And the highest work of art was no longer a temple of victory, with the statues of the victors. It was the picture of a human soul so transformed by love, that a man who is tormented and put to death pities and loves his tormentors. And so it is hard for the people of the Christian world to halt the momentum of pagan art, an art they have grown into with their whole lives. The content of Christian religious art is so new to them, so unlike the content of the older art, that Christian art seems to them a denial of art itself, and they cling desperately to the old art. And meanwhile that old art, having no source any longer in religious consciousness, has lost all its meaning, and whether we will or not, we must give it up. The essence of the Christian consciousness lies in the recognition by each person of his sonship to God, and in the union of people with God and with one another that follows from it, as the Gospel says. And so the content of Christian art is those feelings that work for the union of people with God and with one another. The phrase, the union of people with God and with one another, may seem unclear to people who are used to hearing these words so often abused, yet the words have a very clear meaning. They mean that the Christian union of people, as against a partial, exclusive union of only some people, is the union that joins all people without exception. Art, all art in itself, has the property of joining people. In every work of art, those who take in the feeling the artist has carried are united in soul, first with the artist, and second with everyone else who has received the same impression. But non-Christian art, in joining some people together, by that very joining separates them from other people. So this partial joining often becomes a source not only of division, but of hostility towards others. Such is all patriotic art, with its anthems, its poems, its monuments. Such is all church art, that is, the art of particular cults, with its icons, its statues, its processions, its services, its temples. Such is military art. Such is all refined art, the art that is depraved in the strict sense, open only to people who oppress others, to people of the idle, wealthy classes. Such art is backward art, art that is not Christian. It joins some people only in order to cut them off still more sharply from other people, and even to set them against other people. Christian art is only the art that joins all people without exception. It does so either by calling up in people the awareness that they all stand in the same position before God and before their neighbor, or by calling up in them one and the same feeling, a feeling that may be the very simplest, but is not contrary to Christianity and belongs to all people without exception. Good Christian art of our time may fail to be understood because of a fault in its form or because people pay it no attention, but it must be such that all people can experience the feelings it carries to them. It must not be the art of one circle of people, or of one class, or of one nationality, or of one religious cult. It must not carry feelings that are open only to a person educated in a certain way, or only to a nobleman, or a merchant, or only to a Russian, or a Japanese, or a Catholic, or a Buddhist, and so on. It must carry feelings open to every human being. Only such art can be recognized in our time as good art, picked out from all the rest of art, and encouraged. Christian art, that is, the art of our time, must be Catholic in the direct meaning of the word, that is, universal, and so it must join all people. And only two kinds of feeling join all people. First, the feelings that flow from the awareness of our sonship to God and of the brotherhood of all people. Second, the very simplest feelings of everyday life, feelings open to all people without exception, such as merriment, tenderness, cheerfulness, calm, and the like. Only these two kinds of feeling make up the subject of art that is good in its content in our time. And the effect these two kinds of art produce, seemingly so different from each other, is one and the same. There are the feelings that flow from the awareness of our sonship to God and of the brotherhood of all people. Firmness in the truth, devotion to the will of God, self-denial, respect for a human being and love for him, all flowing from the Christian religious consciousness. And there are the very simplest feelings, a tender or a merry mood raised by a song, or by an amusing joke that everyone can understand, or by a touching story, or a drawing, or a little doll. Both produce one and the same effect, the loving union of people. It happens that people are together and are, if not hostile to one another, at least strangers to one another in their moods and their feelings. And then suddenly a story, or a performance, or a picture, or even a building, and most often of all music, joins all these people as though by an electric spark, and instead of the separateness they were in before, instead even of the hostility, they all feel union and love for one another. Each is glad that another feels what he feels, each is glad of the communion that has been set up, not only between him and everyone present, but between him and all who are living now and will receive the same impression. And more than that, he feels the mysterious joy of a communion beyond the grave with all the people of the past who felt the same feeling, and with the people of the future who will feel it. This is the effect produced alike by the art that carries feelings of love for God and for one's neighbor, and by the everyday art that carries the very simplest feelings common to all people. The difference between the way the art of our time must be appraised and the way art was appraised before lies chiefly in this. The art of our time, Christian art, rests on a religious consciousness that demands the union of people, so it shuts out from the field of art good and content everything that carries exclusive feelings, feelings that do not join people, but divide them, and it counts such art as art bad in content. And on the other hand, it takes into the field of art good in content a whole class of art that was never before thought worth picking out and respecting, universal art, art that carries feelings which may be the slightest and simplest, but which are open to all people without exception, and which therefore join them. Such art cannot fail to be recognized as good in our time, because it reaches the very goal that the religious Christian consciousness of our time sets before humanity. Christian art either calls up in people the feelings which, through love for God and for one's neighbor, draw them to a greater and ever greater union and make them ready and able for such union. Or it calls up in them the feelings that show them they are already joined by the shared joys and sorrows of life. And so the Christian art of our time can be and is of two kinds. First, art that carries feelings flowing from the religious consciousness of a person's place in the world in relation to God and to his neighbor, religious art. Second, art that carries the very simplest feelings of everyday life, feelings open to all people in the whole world, universal art. Only these two kinds of art can be counted good art in our time. The first kind, religious art, carries positive feelings, love for God and for one's neighbor, and also negative ones, indignation and horror and the violation of love. It appears chiefly in the form of words, and in part in painting and sculpture. The second kind, universal art, carries feelings open to all, and it appears in words, in painting, in sculpture, in dance, in architecture, and above all in music. If I were asked to point to examples in the new art of each of these kinds, then as examples of the highest religious art, the art that flows from love for God and for one's neighbor, in literature, I would name The Robbers by Schiller. Among the more recent works, The Poor People by Victor Hugo and his Les Miserables, the tales, the stories, and the novels of Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, The Chimes, and others, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Dostoevsky, above all his House of the Dead, and Adam Bede by George Eliot. In the painting of modern times, works of this kind, works that carry the Christian feelings of love for God and for one's neighbor directly, are almost impossible to find, strange as that seems, and least of all among the famous painters. There are pictures from the Gospels, a great many of them, but they all carry a historical event with a great wealth of detail. They do not carry, and they cannot carry, a religious feeling their makers do not have. There are many pictures showing the personal feelings of various people, but pictures that carry deeds of self-denial, of Christian love, are very few, and those that exist are mostly by little-known painters, and they are not finished pictures but drawings. Such is the drawing by Kramskoy, worth many of his pictures. It shows a drawing room with a balcony, and past the balcony the troops are marching home in triumph. On the balcony stand a nurse with a baby and a boy. They are admiring the procession of the troops. And the mother has fallen against the back of the sofa, sobbing, her face covered with a handkerchief. Such too is the picture by Lang to point, in the new art of the upper classes, to examples of the second kind, of good, universal, everyday art, is harder still, especially in the art of words and in music. There are works which by their inner content might be counted in this class: Don Quixote, the comedies of Molière, Dickens's David Copperfield in the Pickwick Papers, the tales of Gogol and of Pushkin, some things of Maupassant's. But these works are for the most part open only to people of their own nation, and even only to people of their own circle. This is so because the feelings they carry are exclusive, because they are overloaded with special details of time and place, and above all, because their content is poor when set beside the great examples of ancient universal art, such as the story of Joseph. Joseph's brothers, jealous of him before their father, sell him to the merchants. Potiphar's wife wants to seduce the young man. The young man rises to the highest place, takes pity on his brothers, on his beloved Benjamin, and all the rest. These are feelings open to a Russian peasant, to a Chinese, to an African, to a child, to an old man, to the educated and the uneducated alike, and all of it is written with such restraint, without any needless detail, that the story can be carried over into any other setting you like, and it will be just as clear and just as moving to everyone. The feelings of Don Quixote are not like that, nor the feelings of Molière's characters, though Molière is perhaps the most truly popular, and therefore the finest artist of the new art. Still less are the feelings of Pickwick and his friends. Those feelings are highly exclusive. They are not common to all human beings, and so to make them infectious, the authors have surrounded them with an abundance of details of time and place. And that abundance of detail makes these stories more exclusive still, and hard to understand for anyone living outside the setting the author describes. The story of Joseph did not need to describe in detail, as would be done now, the blood-stained coat of Joseph, or the dwelling and the clothes of Jacob, or the pose and the dress of Potiphar's wife, and how she adjusted the bracelet on her left arm as she said, "Come in to me." It did not need to, because the content of feeling in that story is so strong that every detail is needless, except the most necessary ones, such as Joseph going out into another room to weep. All the rest would only get in the way of carrying the feeling. And so this story is open to all people. It moves people of every nation, every class, every age. It has come down to us, and it will live on for thousands of years more. But take the details away from the best novels of our time, and what is left? So in the new art of words, there is nothing one can point to that fully satisfies the demands of universality. Even the works that do exist are mostly spoiled by what is called realism, which would be more truly named provincialism in art. In music, the same thing happens as in the art of words, and for the same reasons. Because the content is poor and the feeling is poor, the melodies of the new musicians are strikingly empty. And so, to strengthen the impression an empty melody makes, the new musicians pile up on every trifling melody complicated modulations, and not only modulations in the mode of their own people, but modulations that belong exclusively to a particular circle, a particular school of music. A melody, any melody, is free, and everyone can understand it. But as soon as it is bound to a particular harmony and buried under it, it becomes open only to people who have grown used to that harmony, and it becomes wholly foreign, not only to other nationalities, but to anyone who does not belong to the circle that has trained itself to certain forms of harmony. So music turns in the same false circle as poetry does. Trifling and exclusive melodies are buried under harmonic, rhythmic, and orchestral complications in order to make them attractive, and so they become more exclusive still. They become not merely not universal, but not even national. They are open only to some people and not to a whole people. In music, apart from the marches and dances of various composers, which come near to the demands of universal art, one can point only to the folk songs of the various peoples, from the Russian to the Chinese, and in learned music to very few works, to Bach's famous violin aria, to Chopin's nocturne in E-flat major, and perhaps to a dozen things, not whole pieces but passages picked out of the works of Haydn, Mozart, Schubert, Beethoven, and Chopin. In painting, the same thing is repeated as in poetry and in music. Works that are weak in conception are dressed up in order to make them more entertaining, with accessories of time and place studied down to the last detail, and these accessories give the works an interest that is temporary and local, and make them less universal. Yet in painting, more than in the other kinds of art, one can point to works that satisfy the demands of universal Christian art, that is, to works expressing feelings open to all people. The works of painting and of sculpture that are universal in content are all the pictures and statues of the so-called genre kind, the pictures of animals, then landscapes, cartoons with a content everyone can grasp, and ornament of every sort. There are a great many such works in painting and in sculpture, the porcelain dolls among them, but most such things, all kinds of ornament for instance, are either not counted as art at all, or counted as art of a lower order. In truth, all such things are works of real good Christian art, if only they carry a sincere feeling of the artist, however trifling that feeling may seem to us, and are understandable to all people. I am afraid I will be reproached here for contradicting myself. I have denied that the idea of beauty makes up the subject of art, and now I recognize ornament as the subject of good art. The reproach is unjust. The content of the art of ornament of every kind lies not in beauty, but in the feeling of delight, of pleasure, before a combination of lines or of colors, a feeling the artist has experienced and with which he infects the viewer. Art was and is, and cannot be anything other than the infection of one person by another, or of others, with the feeling the one who infects has experienced. And among those feelings is the feeling of pleasure at what pleases the eye. Things that please the eye may please a few people, or a great many, or all. An ornament is chiefly of that last sort. A landscape of a very unusual place, a genre picture of a very particular subject, may not please everyone, but ornament, from the ornament of the Yakuts to the ornament of the Greeks, is open to everyone and calls up the same feeling of pleasure in everyone. And so this despised kind of art must be valued in a Christian society far above exclusive, pretentious pictures and sculptures. So there are only two kinds of good Christian art. All the rest, everything that does not fall under these two kinds, must be recognized as bad art. It must not be encouraged. It must be driven out, denied, and despised, as art that does not join people, but divides them. Such in the art of words, are all the dramas, the novels, and the poems that carry church feelings and patriotic feelings, and besides those, the exclusive feelings that belong to one class only, the class of the rich and idle, the feelings of aristocratic honor, of surfeit, of weariness, of pessimism, and the refined and depraved feelings that flow from sexual love, feelings the great majority of people cannot understand at all. Such in painting are all the falsely religious and patriotic pictures, and the pictures that show the amusements and the charms of an exclusive, rich and idle life. Such are all the so-called symbolic pictures in which the very meaning of the symbol is open only to people of a certain circle. And above all, such are all the pictures with voluptuous subjects, all that hideous female nakedness that fills every exhibition and every gallery. To this same kind belongs nearly all the chamber music and operatic music of our time, beginning with Beethoven, Schumann, Berlioz, Liszt, Wagner. In its content it is given over to the expression of feelings that are open only to people who have cultivated in themselves a sick nervous irritability, an irritability roused by this artificial, exclusive, and complicated music. What? The Ninth Symphony belongs to the bad kind of art, I hear the indignant voices. Everything I have written only in order to find a clear and reasonable criterion by which the worth of works of art could be judged. And this criterion, agreeing as it does with plain, sound sense, shows me beyond doubt that Beethoven's symphony is not a good work of art. Of course, it is astonishing and strange for people brought up to worship certain works and their makers, for people whose taste has been perverted precisely by that upbringing in worship, to hear such a famous work called bad. But what is to be done with the findings of reason and of sound sense? Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is held to be a great work of art. To test that claim, I first ask myself this: does this work carry the highest religious feeling? And I answer no, because music by itself cannot carry such feelings. So I ask myself further, if this work does not belong to the highest order of religious art, does it have the other property of the good art of our time, the property of joining all people in one feeling? Does it belong to Christian, everyday, universal art? And here too, I cannot help answering no. Not only do I fail to see how the feelings this work carries could join people who have not been specially trained to submit to this complicated hypnosis. I cannot even imagine a crowd of normal people who could make out anything at all in this long, tangled, artificial work, apart from short scraps that drown in a sea of what is incomprehensible. And so, whether I will or not, I must conclude that this work belongs to bad art. And here is a remarkable thing. At the end of this symphony, a poem of Schiller's is attached, and that poem, though it is not clear, expresses exactly this thought, that feeling, and Schiller speaks of one feeling only, of joy, joins people and calls up love in them. And although the poem is sung at the end of this symphony, the music does not answer the thought of the poem, because that music is exclusive. It does not join all people. It joins only some and cuts them off from other people. In just the same way, we shall have to appraise many and many works of art of every kind that pass for great among the upper classes of our society. By this one firm criterion we shall have to appraise the famous Divine Comedy, and Jerusalem Delivered, and the greater part of the works of Shakespeare and of Goethe, and in painting, every representation of miracles, and Raphael's Transfiguration and the rest. Whatever the thing put forward as a work of art may be, and however people may praise it, to know its worth we must put this question to it: does the thing belong to real art or to the counterfeits of art? And having recognized by the mark of infectiousness, even towards a small circle of people, that a certain thing belongs to the field of art, we must then, by the mark of general accessibility, settle the next question: does this work belong to bad, exclusive art, contrary to the religious consciousness of our time, or to Christian art, the art that joins people? And having recognized the thing as belonging to real Christian art, we must then assign it to the one kind or the other, to religious art or to everyday universal art, according to whether it carries feelings flowing from love for God and for one's neighbor, or only the simple feelings that join all people. Only on the basis of this test will it be possible for us to pick out from the whole mass of what passes for art in our society the things that make up real, important, needful spiritual food, and to separate them from all the harmful and useless art, and from the semblance of art that surrounds us. Only on the basis of such a test will we be able to escape the ruinous consequences of harmful art, and to make use of that beneficent action of true and good art, which is its purpose, and which is necessary to the spiritual life of a person and of humanity.